Hey there. Welcome to the Pelvis Project podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Roxy. We're two pelvic health experts brought together by passion for our careers, entrepreneurship, motherhood, and the desire for intentional relationships.
Join us in our mission to spread pelvic floor awareness and start conversations surrounding the truth behind genuine health, imperfect wellness, and joyfully navigating life. We are so glad you are here with us.
Let's start the conversation. Hello, Megan.
Hello, Roxy.
How's it going?
Okay. Again, 9:30 at night.
Yeah, we are just owls, night owls.
We need to
Pelvis Project podcast.
I know. I was going to say we need to change the name of our podcast to like
PM.
I don't know.
PM.
The Night Owls.
With the P.
It just works out this way.
Just does. Well, we have wrapped up our fertility series.
Yes.
And so if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to, how many was it? 3?
I think it was 4.
4.
Yeah.
Series of fertility, how pelvic rehab practitioners that are certified can be really helpful in the fertility journey and all the nuts and bolts that go along with that. And so that was fun. We got to do that.
Yeah.
And now we're going to jump into a little bit lighter note. But before we do that, tell me something good, Megan.
Oh, gosh. Tell me something good. I'm not pausing because we haven't had anything good happen. I'm pausing because there's been lots that has happened. So, well, I think I'm going to say the tell me something good is we are leaving on we're recording this on Tuesday. We're leaving on Friday to go to my aunt and uncle's lake house. And it's just kind of like our happy place and just good quality time. And I'm really looking forward to it. Something I've been working on is trying to get back to some of my own life stuff because I feel like it's been clinic life for going on 2 years now. And if you own a small business, you understand. So looking forward to that. So that's my tell me something good is I get to go out of town for just a couple of days, unplug, and spend some uninterrupted time with my family.
That's good.
What about you, Rox?
Mine's kind of similar. I went I think it was last weekend. No, 2 weekends ago. Every year, some girls and I go on a girls hiking trip and we go up to Colorado and we hike a 14er and
fun.
It was so good. It just feels like this hard thing that you do. And we're like flatlanders out here from Kansas and we try to go into this elevation. And so it's kind of an added dynamic, but there's always really rich conversation that happens while we're hiking. And I don't know, there's just something about being out in the open next to huge mountains and just realizing how small and insignificant we are. And
yeah,
this trip, I have a friend that's really passionate about hiking. She's really good. She loves it though. And she just feels like that's like what fills her cup. And so she'll take groups out. And this trip we went on,
awesome.
There was probably 5 or 6 mom-daughter pairs that came out. There were 8th grade daughters and then their moms. And it's like, this is the second trip that I've been accompanying my friend on. Where we hike it for us, but she'll bring some other people like that. But this is the second one where there's been mom-daughter pairs. And it just is really beautiful. I think this was not planned at all, actually. We're going to talk about mom-daughter.
I was just thinking, I was like, that's a good segue.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just think it's really beautiful to see how different moms and daughters interact. And, obviously I have my experience with my mom and that's what I kind of knew. And maybe even just saw some of my friends and how they interacted with their moms. But I think just now being a mom too, to say, that I like just to be able to kind of pull from different people that you see and say, I really like how they do that. Or, I think that's really fun that they do it that way. Or, I don't know. I just think that the mother-daughter relationship is like, sometimes we put it in a box. I don't know. I didn't mean to really go deep with that. But I had a great hike. It was a great trip. But just even reflecting on the trip, it was like, like goals. Like, what do I want
Yeah.
my relationship with my girls to be evolving into as they get older and whatnot? And it's like,
Hmm.
and the sky is the limit, and I don't have to do it just like my mom did it, and she didn't do anything wrong. Like we're all just doing the
Right.
best we can, and
Right.
my girls might hate hiking. I don't know, but it was just like kind of really, really beautiful to see. Oh, it's how could we connect? That's
Hmm.
outside of daily life, even. What would be some other ways to connect and do something together that would be special and just fun and memorable? So anyway,
Yeah.
there's something good, but it does kind of segue into what we're getting ready to talk about.
Well, it does. And also, I mean, what we were gonna talk about of like, well, I'm gonna share a little story that about my daughter and I, but just in general, when you say that, of just kind of like thinking about how, how can we do things a little bit differently? Again, not that anything was done poorly or wrong, just different. And how can we raise, because I have a daughter that's about to turn 13. Obviously, Roxy's daughters are a lot younger. So it is kind of fun to, like, I feel like I'm like, how do I have a 13-year-old Roxy and how old's Isla?
I was
6,
4.
4?
She'll be 5 in November. Yeah,
Why do
she's
I
4.
feel like I'm not that old? How old are you, Roxy?
I just turned 35. I
Okay.
feel
I'm not
old.
too bad. Okay. I'm 40. So I just
Yeah.
like, I'm not 10 years older.
We just
Uh,
waited. We just waited a little
yeah,
longer.
that's totally fine. Gosh, I know this is actually going to turn out to be such a fun conversation, I think. Well,
Hmm.
I was trying to remember. I had Grace when I was 27. Yeah,
Hmm.
because she's about to turn. And I remember thinking at the time I was like so old. And now, I mean, I'm so glad that we waited. We were married for 6 years before we had her, but it was nice for us to have some time, you know. And that was just for me personally. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, but it's just like it's just the realization that like I have a 13-year-old, and what we're going to talk about and how this segues well is menstrual periods and reproductive health, and how when what Roxy and I just obviously we talk about fertility, but really what it comes down to is how we can treat and support the reproductive system. And that's even like periods and cycles. And so I was just going to share a story about my daughter who actually just started her first period. And I have talked to her a couple times now and asked for her permission to talk about this. And both times she was like, oh, of course. So she is totally fine with it. And I probably, if I would have said, do you want to come talk on the podcast? She'd have jumped all over it. So
Oh, we should have. That would have been so
I
sweet.
know. Maybe I'll have her like jump on some other time and she can keep us
Yeah.
updated on how she's doing with her
Yeah.
period. So Roxy just thought it would be fun to have a conversation and kind of share a couple things with the experience that I just went through with her. And hopefully you can take away a few tips about our experience. And as we're talking, just like Roxy and I both just sharing as pelvic floor therapists, a couple of recommendations that we would give if you are raising girls. So, with that being said, the first thing, obviously, and Roxy can attest to this too, is just making sure with our girls that we are using, I know everybody's probably heard this correctly, but we're using appropriate body part words.
Yes.
So, I can say for myself, because I didn't get into pelvic health until, that was 2017 ish. And prior to that, I was still PT, but I don't think I really registered too much. We didn't really have a name for vagina, but I just don't think I just think I referred to it as like your private parts.
Mhm.
And so I remember the day that I told Grace, she like knew what a penis was and she knew the name penis. And I was like, do you even know what the name of your private part is? And I said vagina. And she was like, what? That is a weird word. And I'm like, why is it a weird word? And I thought, oh my gosh, I failed as a mother.
That's too good. Isla says Gina. She
China.
doesn't always get the in there.
I love it. And then when I got her a book that was more about her body and the word vulva was in it, she even said, Mom, I feel like weird saying the word vulva. And I was just like, okay, like, and I just said, honey, at this point, I was in pelvic health. And I said, well, why do you feel weird about it? Obviously we're not going to walk around town blasting the word vulva everywhere. But like when we're speaking about our body, like it's okay. But I mean, she definitely now she knows and she's used to me talking about what I do and using those words. And she's used to me saying those words in front of my husband. And he doesn't act a certain way about it and give a response that is, like, oh, gross, don't say that. Because it's just amazing how young girls, all it takes is for that word for vagina or vulva to be said in front of somebody that says, oh, gross. And then there's like, all of a sudden they're like, oh, what's gross about that? Okay, I guess I'm gross. So I think it's just like, you know, some good education using words and tell your dads out there that are dads to girls, when that word gets said, just stay neutral. Just like
Sure.
when the word penis is said.
I obviously I'm very fresh into the parenting, into the conversation, that type of thing, but I'm kind of like I feel like a sponge when it comes to just having these conversations because again, my mom didn't do anything intentionally
Right.
wrong, right? It just this isn't a common, I feel like in central rural Midwest, like these are not, and maybe that's just a bad generalization, but a lot of my friends also didn't have like great conversation around this either. So I know it's not just me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, like one thing that has really just resonated me in parenting in general, but specifically with this is just the idea that if you don't influence your child, then someone or someone else will. And
Yes. Yes.
that's just across
Mm-hmm.
the board. But I
Mm-hmm.
think especially with when it comes to this type of topic, like I'm trying to lay the groundwork here of just educating her. So I establish myself as the expert so that then when
Yes.
she has questions, she's coming to me and she's not
Mm-hmm.
coming to a little friend down the, down the hall in school or someone else's mom, or whatever it is, like, or maybe TV or social media or Google or
Yeah.
whatever it's going to be when she's older. I want her to come to me for these things and have that rapport with her. And so just even like naming things correctly and just having it be matter of fact and not being weird about it, like hoping that I'm laying a groundwork then that she does come to me and she does ask when she does have questions, she does come and ask me, like, what's this mean? Or if she hears something even derogatory someday, like, what's that mean,
Yeah.
mom? Like, what are these words? Or, that we can already have been talking about this, even though she's just 4 right now. So I think even like if we look at it as a deeper meaning, like we're just looking really anatomical, pelvic health.
Mm-hmm.
This can be really light, but it can go deeper too. And I think, man, what a good opportunity. Like, how hard is it just to like say the anatomical body part? Like, it's evidence based,
Yeah.
it's research, it's in textbooks. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
get more black and white than that. And like that, I think that can just be a really good starting point. And even if you're older and, like just to say, to go back and say, you know what, we didn't really talk about this well. Like, let's just sit down and have a conversation about this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that would ever be too late, or just to, have this really foundational conversation. And it could open up a lot more options. And I'm hoping, at least I'm hoping in my life, that it opens up more opportunity to talk, that it'll be a easier conversation down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like what you said about the being the authority on the topic, I told Grace early on just that. I mean, I straight out was like, listen, you're going to hear all sorts of things, and especially tying in from what we do for a profession. I said, but you have to know that like I know this stuff and I'm your expert resource on it. So whatever you hear or whatever you're told, come to me and bring it to me and let's have a conversation about it. And what I tell you and I educate you on doesn't mean that you get to go like spread it out all over for, everywhere. Because, obviously, like let each parent have that conversation. But know that what I'm telling you, like you just said, you're not picking it up from a friend, you're not picking it up from whoever, because when kids don't know answers or have questions and they don't know, sometimes they just make stuff up. And I can't even remember the examples, but we had that experience. Didn't have something to do with body parts, but it was something kind of like in that realm. And I remember asking her, like, well, what do you think? What does that mean to you? And it was something totally off of what it was. And I was like, oh, honey,
Was it French kissing?
I know, I feel like I told you, but
I feel like you told me this
I
too.
think we had
Sorry.
this
I was thinking it was
conversation.
like French kiss or
I
something.
feel like it was something like kissing.
Making out.
Oh,
What was
yes.
it? It was
Yes,
something
it was
like that.
something like that. It was something like that. That was just totally out there. And so that was a perfect example. And I used that as an example for her, you know? And so she was like, okay, yeah. So anyway, just back to the fact that like being able to have those open conversations and also like as long as your spouse or husband is comfortable with it, like him being around because Nathan made the comment once to Grace when she said to me something about in her book and it said the word vulva and she kind of whispered it and acted a little and he just spoke up and said, Grace, you don't need to feel uncomfortable saying that around me. And she was like, and he was like, I know all the body parts. And so it was just really nice because at that point I was like, okay. And I honestly feel like that has set the tone that she actually goes, she's had, you know, crushes on boys and stuff like that, where she goes and tells him about it. Like she's like,
That's
Dad,
sweet.
can I tell you about the boy that I like? And he knows not to say like, oh my gosh, no, or, you know, all the stuff. He's like, yeah, go ahead. And of course we make jokes and, you know, little things like that. But I really do honestly, like looking back on us raising her, I feel like that moment that happened and he was just like, you don't have to feel uncomfortable saying that around me has really been a good thing and reiterating to her over and over again that like you can always talk to him about it too if I'm not around. And I'll say things like, no matter what you're told, like come bring it to me first. And I don't care if that's from friends. I don't care if that's from school. I don't care where the education has come from. Come now, bring it to me and let's have a talk because you just don't know what someone's told your daughter
Yeah.
or your son. So that, and then also speaking of like periods and stuff, early on, I told her there's going to come a time when you're going to feel very emotional and you might be really snippy, or you might feel like crying for no reason, or you might suddenly think I'm the worst person in the world. But that is what's called your period. And like laying it out there ahead of time so that
Hmm.
she's not taken off guard about it. And when it pops up, I can say, like, what's happening right now? What's going on? And she'll be like, I have no idea. And I'm like, that's okay. But like, let's have instead of being like, oh, gee, she's just an emotional teen
Mm-hmm.
and playing into this like almost role that is like expected and just like, I don't want to talk poorly about it. Like, I
Yeah.
don't want it to be a bad thing. It's amazing because it's what our bodies it's supposed to be doing.
I think that's probably one of, just like on a personal level, one of the biggest personal takeaways from just all of this fertility work that we've gone through, though, is
Yes.
also just like, oh, we periods get a bad rap. Like we have memes and mugs and t-shirts and whatnot about just like hormones and I don't know, like it's just like this negative thing and it's I mean, it's not always fun, obviously. Like I'm not saying that it's this joyous part of
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
life, but I think just really looking at the purpose and the beauty behind it, like, yeah, I guess I think I just have a newfound appreciation for what my body's doing regularly and kind of almost starting to roll my eyes inside at
Yeah.
when it does get like generalized as this just total inconvenience.
Oh, totally. I mean, this sounds really funny to say, but like, I love it when I start my period. I'm like, all right, you did it. And I love it even more when it's at 28 days because I have been in that place before when I had my thyroid storm where I didn't start my period and it like from when I started my period to when it stopped to when I started again. So a full cycle, it was 54 days. And I was scared. Like, I was like,
Mm,
what's going on? And so now, especially if somebody has an autoimmune disease, I'm so proud every single time my cycle starts when it's supposed to. And I'm also pretty sensitive to if something's off on it and it's short or whatever. Like Roxy knows, I've been telling her about had a little spell where it was like totally off. And it is a definite sign. And I have to like alter the ship a little bit when that happens of like, okay, we're navigating in the wrong direction here. What
mm,
is it I need to do? Is it that I'm not sleeping? Is it my stress? Like it tells me so much. So I when I start my period, I'm like, cool. Like, good job.
Like things are working.
I
Things are working
literally,
good.
yeah, I literally rely on it to tell me a lot about what's going on in my with my body. Now, that being said, we definitely want to like hold space for the fact that like, oh my goodness, people with fibroids and endo and all that kind of stuff. Periods are a different story. But generally speaking, that's the thing is in a quote unquote like normal cycle, we don't want to see these big spikes in pain, stuff like that. So anyway, okay, back on track. We can segue all night with these. So
Seriously,
this
yeah.
is good conversation though. I'm loving this. So anyway, yes. So, talk using those anatomical terms with your kids and like just like planting little seeds, even when they're younger. I think I started saying stuff to Grace about that fairly early on before even like periods and stuff were on her radar or like even like going through puberty of just like, okay, like just making silly little jokes like you're always going to hug me. There's going to be one day that like it's just like almost like a storybook that like we talked
Mm,
about and now we're living it. So, what sparked us with this conversation was, like I mentioned, my daughter has started her cycle for the first time a couple weeks ago, and actually, it's been about a month ago now. And the first thing I told Roxy was, I was like, "Well, first lesson learned from this whole situation was a mother's instinct is always correct, and we really need to pay attention to that." I can tell you specific scenarios. I was like, her foot's broken. And I'm like, everybody's like, no, no. And then it was. And I'm like, okay, I should have relied on my intuition. Yes, I'm right. That's happened multiple times in different scenarios. So I should have known better. But when at the end of the school year last year in May, Grace has started to get really, really tired. And I just kind of thought, well, she's probably getting ready to start her cycle. Cause, obviously, like all the signs are leading that way. But there were certain times where it seemed to be a little bit excessive. And so my intuition was like, there's something else going on here. But then, and my mom instinct, but then I think I fell into that, like, I know too much and I'm just being super sensitive. And I think that as anybody in healthcare can attest to, like, that happens, regardless of if you're like a nurse or a doctor or whatever, with your own kids, you almost need somebody else to like kick you out of it and be like, yeah, you need to go get something checked. So I just kind of sat on it for a little while, honestly, longer than I probably should have, because that was in May and then it was all of June. It's probably like a month and a half. And she had a few days where she would just say, like, oh, I just didn't feel like I could get out of bed. Like my legs feel so weak. And I'm like, okay, that's not typical. That's like not period related. So we probably need to look at something. I actually think it was a patient of mine who happens to be a nurse by trade who said something like, maybe you should have some blood work done and make sure she didn't have like mono. And I was just like, that was exactly what I needed to hear from somebody because I was like, all right, I'm not crazy like that. I needed to do that. So we got her some blood work and found out that she did have mono. So I was like kicking myself. Not that we could have done anything, but poor thing in the midst of all that peak of probably monoland, she was going and running and like doing cross country conditioning. And she'd come home and be so tired. And I was like, you don't feel energized? That was another thing. I was like, do you know what it feels like to run and feel good? And she's like, I don't think so. So we right away, we found out, put a stop to all the running. And in fact, she's not even going to do cross country this year. She has still pretty fatigued. And they start practice at the start of school and they run in the mornings really early because of the heat. And to us, sleep is the priority. And then her being able to make it through a school day. So running, I mean, this is another like just hello, parents, make sure that, like, it's not a big deal if we skip cross country. I think somebody asked me, does she have to run? And I was like, no, so we're not going to do it. So she did ask, she was like, can I try volleyball instead? And I am giving in to the fact that she's still going to maybe try to do a sport. It's just not going to be as intense where she's having to run, and like drain her body. So with that being said, just talking about like her as a female and our body obviously still recovering from the mono and obviously having that inflammation. So we found out she had mono, and I told her, okay, we're not running anymore. Made sure that she was, like, we have to make sure that we're eating, we have to make sure that we're sleeping, we have to make sure that we're resting. And so she did really solid for a good week. And then we left to go to the lake. And on the way to the lake, she started her period. So it was a double doozy of mono and starting her cycle. So I do think that part of her being like starting was the fact that like her body was able to rest and let down. Cause sometimes we see that with young girls that they don't start their periods. It can be that they're just running on empty all the time and exercising a lot and not eating and not sleeping and all that kind of stuff. So it really was kind of an interesting thing to see happen. Could have been a coincidence, but it was just pretty interesting the second that we almost like you could see that our body had been in this like stress. And the moment we found out and we were like fully supportive and that we need to have rest time, that happened. So yay. So now we're celebrating that like she started her period. This little story. We were on our way at a rest stop, stopped to go pee. And sure enough, good times.
Flow was there.
Flow is there. So, and I just think it's so sweet that she's totally fine with me like sharing this story, because again, I think that's just another testament to her that she very much could be like, oh no, that's gross. Don't talk about that. That she's like, yeah, let's talk about it. So there's like so much packed into this because so many things happen. So we're on our way to the lake and she is sad because not sad, but just like, dang, why this happen on the way to the lake? And our like family joke is that anytime you go to the lake, you start your period. It's just always happens. And I said, well, what better place to be than at the lake when you're on your period? We can wear sweatpants and we can watch movies and I'm with you. You're not at school. And she was like, yeah. So we tried to make it, special. And so we went out and I told my husband and he was like, oh no. But he was like, no, I don't mean, oh no. I mean, oh no, we're on the way to the lake. And so he just gave her a big hug. And then, of course, Owen was like, what's going on? And we are like, oh, nothing, just some girly stuff. And her tummy's kind of bothering her because I wasn't about ready to be like giving him the whole period lesson. And so she just like shut it down. He's like, okay, that's all I needed to say was, oh, nothing, just some girly stuff. So, because we're like on the side of the road, we're at the gas station. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to tell him about this another time. But anyways, so we go down there. And so we had to have the discussion of like, if we were going to try tampons. And this was the same weekend, like literally got back from the lake and the report of all the tampons having heavy metals in them came out. And so then, of course, my husband was like, oh my gosh, like, what do we need to be concerned about this? And then toxic shock and all that kind of stuff. And I think that I recognize we have different options out there to use cups and discs and all that kind of stuff, but tampons aren't going anywhere. And for a almost 13-year-old girl, that's not a possibility. Like I can't teach her how to use a cup or a disc at 12. She wanted to swim and we had to have that conversation about tampons and all the stuff. So anyway, that was like, holy cow. But really, as Roxy and I are going to talk more about this, just some things that I tried with her that worked well and things to consider if your adolescent daughter started her cycle. So, Roxy, I don't know about you, but the first time that you ever used a tampon, like, did anybody help you or how did you
No,
figure that
I
out?
read I have an older sister and I stole her
Okay.
box and I read the instructions on the box and I used a mirror.
Yeah.
And I
And
followed the
that,
directions pretty stinking good, I think, because I had a friend then later, like a couple months later, that put the tampon in and didn't remove the applicator all day.
oh man, I've heard that story so many times from
So
people.
I was like, thank goodness I read the stinking instructions.
Okay. So this is great because this is step number one, people. You heard it here first. To pelvic floor therapists, our top recommendation is to have your daughters just read the instructions
In a mirror.
because my first experience using a tampon is my mom and I were laughing about this is because she tried to help me and she was being supportive, but I could not get that sucker in. And she's like, I don't know. I don't know what you're doing wrong. And I mean, I remember I was just trying to stick it like, it's just like straight in. Like, I don't know. It was like hitting my urethra or something, my pubic bone. I don't know. And I got so frustrated. I was crying because I wanted to go to fantasy so bad. And if you're from Wichita, you know what I'm talking about. Shout out to the OG fantasy crew. So finally, I just got out the flipping instructions and I opened them up and I saw the picture and I read the instructions and it made perfect sense. And I got it in. And so I knew all along in my head, like for years now, I've been thinking to myself, the second she starts her period, the first thing I'm going to do if she has to use a tampon is pull out the instruction manual and literally show it to her.
It works. It works. But I will tell you though, I don't know how many patients I have that have never looked at their vulva and their vaginal
I
opening
know.
and have never done that. And that is like huge, huge.
I know.
I don't even know how to communicate that. Of just knowing what it looks like down there and knowing
Yeah.
instead of assuming or guessing or whatever. And how many patients I have that just have dysfunction that when they look at it, it's like healing for them.
Oh,
Like there's a
100%.
connection that's been made. And so like I just wanted to make sure I was putting my tampon in the right spot because I had
I
no
know.
clue.
I know.
But I'm so glad I did that because I was like, oh, wow, I did. Like it was just I needed it as a tool. I wasn't like actually exploring or like anything. I just was like, I gotta make sure I put this where it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use a mirror. Why not?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I had joked with Grace. I was like, okay, remember you got three holes: your pee hole, your vagina, and your poop hole. And she was like, got it. Oh my gosh. So yes. So you hear, so not only did you just learn, have your daughters read the instructions, number two, go get a mirror if you haven't yet. And please just look at your vulva.
If you've never done it, I don't care how old you are, do
I
it.
know you
It'll be
do.
life changing. Turn
Yeah.
over a
And
new leaf.
it is. I don't know. There was like, there was I can't remember what company it was for a while. It's like a marketing thing. And they'd have like women go into like this little booth and then they like have to like look
Oh
at their
yeah, yeah.
vulva.
I
And it's
remember
like,
that.
yeah. And, it's funny and everything, but it's true. The other reason why, ladies, you should do this is because you need to see if there's some changes happening. So you need to be able to, you should do a vulvar exam like you do a breast exam. You want to make sure that like there's no like tissue color changes, like paleness happening or white patches, or suddenly you have like a dark spot, or, there's certain conditions where your labias can reabsorb. So there's a reason for it too. So, like, all jokes aside, it is important to do for other medical reasons. So, anyway, yeah, I mean, was I excited about the fact she was going to have to try to use a tampon, her very first experience starting her period? No. Did I want her to do that, have to do that? No, I didn't. But if she wanted to swim and I gave her an option of, it slows down in the water, no one else is here. Like, if you want to wear, something else and wear shorts, you can. And she was like, no, like, I want to try this. And so we had a good conversation about she does not have to do this. Like, we don't want this to be traumatic. So it was really awesome. It was like a beautiful thing. And she could tell like she just made her like so proud. But yeah, so read the instructions. And I said, do you want me to put one in? Do you want me to put a tampon in? And she's like, yeah. And I said, okay. So I did. And I said, okay, well, you gotta see how I do this. So, well, first I think I showed her like how the applicator, you push it, the tampon comes out and everything. So I showed her and then she goes, now why don't you have one in? I said, well, because I'm not on my period. She's like, oh, right. And it was funny because I remembered that when she first had the sex ed conversation and was first told about periods at school, all she heard was, you're going to start your period and you're going to start bleeding. And she checked out. So she missed the part that like you're only going to have your period once a month for like 5 to 7 days. She like still had it in her head that once you start your period, like you're
Forever.
always going to be on your period. And it was so sweet. We laughed about it. Like, I laugh, and I hope everybody knows I'm not laughing at her, making fun of her. Like, we literally, this was such a beautiful, like, just so fun conversation. And I think she said to my husband at the grocery store when we first got into town, she's like, just so you know, you're going to have to get me like coffee and chocolate a couple times. Or no, she said Starbucks and chocolate a couple times a week from here on out or something. And he was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like once a month, Grace. Oh, so fun. So that right there made me pause. And that's my next like little pearl is don't assume because they've been given the talk at school about their periods that they even let it sink in because it's a lot of information. They're just in shock that I remember when Grace came home and told me all about it. She was just like, so boys, when they go through puberty, they get this V that happens. And like she was like going off on all this stuff. She just downloaded it all to me. And you could tell she was just so overcome by like surprise. So I think the recommendation would be when you know that happens at school, maybe have a conversation right after it, like reiterate things and keep that conversation going and reminding them because they really like their little brains are so young when they're first introduced to that stuff. I can't remember what that was, like fourth grade, fifth grade, or something like that. Like they're still thinking about, you know, whirling around and playing. They're not worried about their periods. And so that's the thing is we have girls starting their cycles so early that some of them are dealing with their periods in fourth and fifth grade. So that's just something to remember is just because they've been told it doesn't mean that that's what they heard and making that very clear and reassuring to them and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, okay, so we went through the instructions and I showed her and then my next recommendation, which is something that we recommend with women sometimes is the first time that your teen or adolescent tries a tampon, if you're around, this is a little pro tip, squirt some lube on it because that's what we did. And that it was so helpful for her. I think everything combined together and giving her, and obviously I recognize that for what I do for a living is different. But like if you can literally, if you're helping your daughter and you literally walk through those steps of like, let's get out the instructions and read it. Let me take a tampon out and just show you when I push it, like how the tampon comes out. If you need to show your daughter if you're, comfortable with that. And then telling them that, you don't, if you don't feel comfortable with it, you don't have to do it. Teaching them how to take a deep breath during, because I know, and Roxy and I know that when you take a breath in, your pelvic floor relaxes. And so if they're holding their breath and everything's tense, that's not going to work. Also, I mean, this is just for, if you want to take it one step further, when you got your little period set there with pads and tampons, you put little packets of some lubrication or a little bottle just for them to put on the tip. So it's easier for it to be inserted. So anyway, we were able to have a really good time. And that's something that, again, she was like, oh, I'm never doing that unless I absolutely have to, again, to go swimming or something. She's like, you better believe it. Because then, of course, we had conversations about safety with tampons and that sort of thing. So, you can't put one in and leave it and forget it and stuff like that. We did talk about like toxic shock and stuff. So anyway, it was just like such a great first experience. And it was good to just be with her through that. And then for her in particular, her cycle just went long. Like I shouldn't say her cycle, like her window of menses was just longer than what we expected and heavy. And so just like being, asking questions during it, like, how's it going? How's your flow? And she doesn't necessarily know what that meant before, but she does now. Does this mean like, is your pad getting full? How soon are we changing it? Questions like that, because we did run into some situations where it was pretty heavy. And so we had to give her some like guidance on that and like wearing certain clothes to try to help. But again, it's just some of those things, you hear stories where they're just like, oh, my daughter started and I didn't even know. And you know what? Like, if you prepared them and you had all the stuff for them and they had a kit and they started and they're like, yep, I know what to do. Like, good job. Bravo. Because you did a really good job with education. And I think that that's just fantastic. So, but otherwise, like just keep that conversation going. And there isn't a right way for anybody. And if this wasn't, it's just a few tips that we have that could make your journey a little bit easier.
Well, moral of the story, don't assume. I think that's kind of the
Yes.
theme that I'm getting is like, don't assume that the school has done a good job. Don't assume that they know. Don't assume that like they know the inner workings of a tampon or how long your cycle is or what to expect. Like, be
Yeah.
present,
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
communicate, even if it's kind of mortifying for them. But I think at the end of the day,
Yeah.
Just being there, yeah, will be what they remember.
The more you talk about it, the less like embarrassing it is for them. And like Roxy just said, yeah, don't assume. And I mean, she even asked me questions about like, she's like, okay, so what is it when you just quit having your period? And I
Mm,
was like, well, that's menopause. And that brings up a whole other conversation is like for a lot of like young girls, like they don't even hear the word menopause until they're like, my mom's going through menopause. So starting the conversation earlier too about that, just so women are aware. And then also too, just like a little side note of like the menstrual health in their cycle, I think it is important for you to kind of be able to help and keep track of like how their flow was because they don't know what's normal. I mean, she asked me so many times, like, is this normal? There was one time she got really frustrated. This was like, she was in the basement, the dog busted in the bathroom, and she's trying to, it's like, she got so mad at the dog. I heard her yelling at the dog. I was like, what's happening? She's like, I'm just so frustrated. And she's like, is this normal? Like, is I done yet? And they don't know what normal is. And so I needed to pay attention to how much she was bleeding because now I know what that first one was like. And as a public health provider, there were some things that I'm going to watch. Like I know that your first cycle can be heavier. I know for some young girls when they start, it's not. And so I want to keep an eye on that because there's some things that I would want to do to help support her menstrual cycle if in fact it continues to stay like, long and heavy and all that kind of stuff, which brings a whole nother conversation that we could have on, just menstrual health and that, painful periods aren't normal, which we kind of talked about in our episode with tracking. But knowing that we don't now what we know, we don't want to be saying like, oh yeah, that's just how it is. Like there's some stuff like let's look about like it again, how's her nutrition? How's she sleeping? How's her stress? How's her activity level been? Like, when was the last time she had a cycle? Because when you first start, it's not going to be every single month. So I told her, I said, honey, we're going to get a calendar out. And in fact, she has an iPad, and I am tempted to just go ahead and put a app on there. Well, that's a whole nother conversation because I've got some ideas in my head about apps for tracking for adolescents. But I said we're gonna track and I'm gonna teach her the basic tracking things. I'm gonna teach her those now because I didn't really know. And I want to teach her, okay, when you start your period is day one, and then we're gonna go out from there. And here in the beginning, we're not gonna notice this, but cervical mucus, that sort of thing. Like nobody told me. Nobody told me what cervical mucus was, what discharge was, why it changed consistency. I had no clue. Well into adulthood, I had no clue. I just thought it was annoying. So I think that just setting her up for success and knowing her body is really my goal. So that's kind of my like little story in our new adventure. And I will give everybody an update of how it's going on the story of Grace starting her period. And again, I'm just so grateful that she's such a kind soul and just makes you smile. And I love that she's just kind of go with the flow and willing to share this stuff. And I love that girl. It's crazy, Roxy. I just go so fast. Now she's 13 and starting her period.
Well, all I can say is I'm glad you're pioneering this because I can just learn everything from you for when my girls are that age.
Oh my goodness. And now I'm going to go sob in the corner. She asked me for her birthday because it's in a couple weeks. Her birthday's on the first day of school. And she was like, I want to go get my hair done professionally. And I said, well, what does that mean? Because we go get our hair done from this like amazing woman that is basically like a second mom to me. And I said, well, we go get your haircut all the time. She's professional. She goes, no, I mean, I want like her to like cut my hair and wash my hair in the bowl and blow it dry and curl it. And I said, okay. So a couple days before school starts, well, a couple days before her birthday, we're gonna go do that together. And I just think it's just so fun.
That is fun.
I love asking kids, like when they say stuff like that, I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? Because like what I think and what they think is two totally different things. Because she's like, I want to get my hair done professionally. Well, to me, she has always
Yeah.
gotten it done professionally. Or like when Owen says stuff like, oh, there's like this little girl he's got a crush on, and he said something like, he hasn't seen anybody from school all summer long. He said something, and I said, well, what does that mean to you? And just to hear their little like definitions of like what a girlfriend means, or like it's so funny. It's like, oh, you can write it all down. So anyway, got any other tips?
I don't think so. I think we covered the basics of it. I think there's just a lot of groundwork ahead of time that can be
Yeah.
done. And maybe that's just because I'm in that phase, of
Yeah.
just I'm not gonna have this topic in front of me for many years, but I can
Yeah.
be laying the groundwork. I think
Yeah.
just normalizing a lot of the words and normalizing even just the facts is
Yeah.
huge. Is
Yeah.
huge. And I don't think it's ever
Yeah.
too late. I think that's,
No,
you
no,
know,
it's not.
I'm learning as I go too, of
Yeah.
just different things.
And absolutely. I think we're all learning. And not, I think we are all learning. We're all in this motherhood journey together. We're all going to screw up. We're all going to feel like we've failed. And we're all going to feel like at times that we haven't done enough or we've done it wrong or we're going to mess them up. But one thing that has always stuck with me, and this was actually from when Grace finished fifth grade, was it was something along the lines of we're all teachers and we're all students. So just because we are the older of like we're the parent, we are a teacher, but we also are a student. So we're always learning. And I just love that because we don't have it all figured out. So everybody give themselves a little grace, pat yourself on the back. You're all doing a great job. And if you have any questions about talking to your kids about their menstrual cycle or how to talk to them, or any questions about pads or tampons or products, definitely like send us a message. Probably the best way to do that is through our Instagram account. You can follow us at the.pelvis.project on on Instagram. We don't have a Facebook, keeping it simple over here. But we'd love to connect with anybody over this topic. And again, just our personal experience. And hopefully you had a good laugh with it and learned something along the way. But just know, number one recommendation, read the directions.
And with
Oh.
that, we're
And with
signing
that,
off.
we're signing off and we'll continue the conversation and we'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks for listening. And we would love it if you'd like and share the podcast. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Pelvis Project podcast. Help us continue the conversation by liking and sharing this episode with friends. And if you really want to do us a solid, leave us a review. If you'd like to follow us on social, check out the show notes for links. And remember, this week, take a deep breath and relax your pelvic floor.